He wakes up every day before the sun, carrying the weight of raising a daughter alone. The absence she left behind was never explained and turned into a silent guilt. But a truth hidden for years comes to light in the most unexpected way. And everything he believed about the past begins to fall apart. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Now, back to the story. The town of Havenwood, Vermont, with its winding roads and colonial houses, was waking up that December morning, under a sky heavy with grey clouds that threatened rain. Robert Miller walked quickly down Maple Street, carrying his metal lunchbox and a time-worn thermos. At 35, his face, weathered by the sun and exhaustion, told stories his mouth rarely revealed. He worked as a restoration mason on historic homes, a trade that demanded physical strength and infinite patience, qualities he had been forced to develop not just at work, but in life. It had been 2 years since Maria had left. 2 years since he had woken up on an ordinary morning to find only a note on the kitchen table, vague words about needing time, about not being able to go on, about it being for the best. Robert had read those sentences so many times he'd memorized them, each word etched like an invisible scar on his chest. She had taken only a small suitcase and left behind a 5-year-old daughter who still asked when Mommy was coming back. Isabella was 7 now, her brown hair always tied in a ponytail that Robert had learned to make by watching videos on his neighbor's borrowed phone. The girl's eyes, brown and deep, held a sadness no child should ever know. She was smart, observant, the kind of kid who noticed when her dad was pretending to be okay, when he forced a smile while serving dinner, or when he stayed up late staring at the bedroom ceiling. Robert's routine followed a rigid pattern he had built as a survival mechanism. He'd wake up at 5 in the morning, when the town was still asleep under the cold pre-dawn blanket. The old alarm clock would ring insistently until he shut it off, but Robert rarely needed it. His body was already conditioned to wake at that hour, carrying the silent anxiety of someone who knows he can't afford to fail. He'd make simple coffee on the 2-burner stove, using the old percolator that had belonged to his mother. As the water heated, he'd look out the small kitchen window at the empty streets of Havenwood, watching the old-fashioned streetlights still glowing, casting long shadows on the uneven cobblestones. It was in these moments of morning solitude that the thoughts invaded without permission. He questioned his choices, replayed old conversations with Maria, searching for signs that might have hinted at what was to come. He would wake Isabella gently, touching her shoulder lightly, whispering good morning with a practiced tenderness. The girl would open her eyes slowly, always a little confused for the first few seconds, and Robert's heart would ache when he realized she was looking for someone who was no longer there. He helped her into her school uniform, buttoning her shirt with calloused fingers that had learned to be gentle, and combed her hair with the delicacy of someone afraid of breaking something precious. At first, the hairstyles were crooked and messy, but over time, Robert learned by watching videos on his neighbor's phone, memorizing the motions, until his large hands could manage simple braids and decent ponytails. Breakfast was quiet, toast with butter, chocolate milk when there was extra money, fruit from the farmer's market when Joe sold it cheaper at the end of the day. Isabella ate slowly, and Robert watched his daughter's every move, alert to any sign of sadness or need she didn't put into words. He would drop her off at the public school before 7, always waiting until she was all the way inside, and waved from her classroom window. This daily ritual was sacred to Robert. He needed to see that she was safe, that at least there, within those walls, Isabella would have a few hours of normalcy. He worked until 5 in the afternoon, under the harsh sun or the fine drizzle that characterized December in Vermont. His hands were covered in calluses and small cuts he no longer always felt. The manual labor was exhausting, but Robert found a kind of painful meditation in it. Every brick laid, every wall raised, every restoration completed was a small victory against the chaos his life had become. He'd pick up his daughter from Mrs. Davis's house, a 60-year-old woman who watched Isabella for a price that fit his tight budget. Mrs. Davis was kind, but Robert always felt a pang of guilt leaving his daughter in someone else's care. They would walk home as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that contrasted with the town's colonial architecture. That December afternoon, while fixing the iron gate of an old house on the town green, Robert felt the familiar weight of loneliness tighten in his chest. Christmas was approaching, and the town was beginning to transform. Colourful lights were strung across Colonial. Facades, modest shop windows displayed simple decorations, and the festive atmosphere contrasted cruelly with the emptiness he carried. The night before, Isabella had asked if Mommy would be back for Christmas. Robert hadn't known what to say. He mumbled something about a gift from Santa Claus and quickly changed the subject, but the question echoed in his mind like a persistent bell. Helen Martin watched everything from a distance, from the window of her modest house on the same street where Robert lived. She was 42, had never married, and lived alone in an old 2-story house inherited from her parents. A retired teacher due to health problems, Helen spent her days reading, tending to a small garden, and watching life go by through her lace curtains. Her neighbors considered her reserved, polite, but distant. Few knew that this distance was actually a shield, a barrier built over years of choices made by others, of dreams deferred for family obligations. She never questioned until it was too late. Helen had only known Robert by sight before Maria left. She'd see the couple out on Sundays, a little Isabella skipping between them, and she'd feel a silent pang of envy at the scene of a complete family. After the separation, she began to watch more closely. She noticed Robert coming home late with Isabella asleep in his arms, saw the lights in his house on until all hours, and perceived the exhaustion in the way he walked, his shoulders slumped as if carrying the world. It was on a stuffy January afternoon the year before that Helen overheard the conversation that would change everything. She was on her porch, drinking lemonade, when the voices came from the house next door, where Maria's mother, Irene, lived. The window was open, and the words cut through the hot air with brutal clarity. "Either you leave that man or I'm cutting you off for good. You will bury me with this shame. My daughter with some uneducated, dead-end construction worker living in this forgotten town. I didn't raise you for this." Helen recognized Irene's voice, harsh and authoritarian. Then came Maria's voice, weak, tearful. "But Mom, I love Robert. Isabella needs her father. Love doesn't pay the bills, Maria. You're 28 and you're throwing your life away. I've already arranged a job for you in Boston at your cousin's company. You're going to start a new life. The girl is better off with her father for now." Helen froze, the glass of lemonade trembling in her hand. She wanted to intervene, to bang on the wall, to make any noise that would interrupt that emotional violence. But she remained motionless, a silent witness to a cruelty disguised as motherly concern. In the following days, Helen saw Maria crying secretly in the backyard, saw Irene leaving the house with a triumphant expression. 2 weeks later, Maria was gone. Irene spread the word around the neighborhood that her daughter had landed an excellent job in the city and needed to focus on her career. No one questioned it. Robert was left alone with a child and a shattered heart. Helen kept that secret like a heavy stone in her pocket. She thought about telling him several times, rehearsed imaginary conversations, but always backed down. Who was she to interfere? What difference would it make? Maria had made her choice, or had she? The line between choice and coercion seemed so blurry. The months passed. Helen began to help discreetly. She'd leave home-cooked meals on Robert's doorstep with anonymous notes. She'd buy notebooks and colored pencils for Isabella, always saying they were leftovers from when she taught. She'd offer to help with the girls' homework when she ran into them on the street. Robert accepted everything with shy gratitude, without asking questions. That December, almost 2 years after Maria's departure, Helen felt she could no longer carry the secret. She saw Robert consuming himself in silent guilt, murmuring apologies no one heard, replaying old conversations trying to find the exact moment everything fell apart. She saw Isabella growing quieter, holding on to questions that had no answers. It was on a particularly warm afternoon that Helen found her courage. Robert was fixing the fence that separated their yards, hammering nails with mechanical precision. Sweat dripped down his face, staining his faded shirt. Isabella was playing with dolls under the big maple tree, creating imaginary dialogues that broke the heart of anyone who listened. Helen made cold lemonade, poured it into a glass pitcher, grabbed 2 glasses, and walked to the fence. Her hands were shaking so much the liquid sloshed dangerously. "Robert, can I talk to you?" He looked up, surprised. Helen rarely initiated conversations. He wiped his hands on the rag he carried in his pocket and nodded. "I brought some lemonade. It's so hot out." Robert accepted the glass, thanked her quietly, and drank in long gulps. The silence between them was thick, heavy with unsaid words. Helen glanced at Isabella, made sure the girl was far enough away, and took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something. Something I heard a long time ago and should have told you sooner. Please forgive me for holding on to it for so long." Robert frowned, confused. Helen clutched the glass in her hands as if it were a protective charm. "It's about Maria, about why she left." Maria's name still hurt like an open wound. Robert felt his stomach clench, but he didn't look away. "I overheard a conversation between her and Irene. It was weeks before she left. Her mother pressured her, threatened to cut her off, said you had no future, that she was throwing her life away. She offered her a job in Boston, said Isabella would be better off with you. It wasn't her choice, Robert. She was forced." The words fell like hailstones on Robert. He stood motionless, the glass nearly slipping from his hand. He felt the ground shift, reality rearranging, itself in his mind like puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. Helen's voice continued, distant, explaining details he could barely process. "She was crying, Robert. She said she loved you, that Isabella needed her father, but Irene is one of those people who doesn't take no for an answer. She manipulated, threatened, used a daughter's love against her." Robert felt tears burning his eyes, but he didn't cry. Inside him, contradictory emotions fought for space. Anger at Irene, compassion for Maria, relief at knowing it wasn't his fault, and rage for having believed he wasn't enough. The guilt he had, carried for 2 years, began to dissolve, giving way to a different, deeper, more complex pain. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Helen's voice trembled. "I was scared. Scared of making things worse, of meddling where I didn't belong. I spent my whole life letting others decide for me, Robert. My family chose my career, chose where I lived, pushed away people I loved, saying they weren't good enough. By the time I finally broke free, it was too late. I recognize control when I see it, but I didn't have the courage to act. I'm so sorry." Robert looked at Helen and saw for the first time not the distant neighbor, but a woman marked by her own silent battles. He saw someone who had also been a prisoner of others' expectations, who understood the pain of living a life that wasn't your own. "Thank you for telling me now." The words were simple, but they carried immense weight. Helen felt something dissolve inside her, as if the secret she'd kept was a stone she could finally let go of. Isabella ran up to them, showing them a flower she had picked. Robert lifted his daughter into his arms, kissed her sweaty forehead, and for the first time in 2 years he felt that maybe, just maybe, it was possible to rebuild something from the rubble. The afternoon settled over Havenwood with its characteristic orange hues. The shadows grew between the colonial houses, and the first lights began to appear in the windows. Robert put his tools away and took Isabella inside, but his mind kept spinning around the revelation. That night, after putting Isabella to bed, Robert sat on the porch with a cup of lukewarm coffee. He looked at the house next door where Helen was also, sitting on her own porch, watching the stars begin to appear in the dark sky. Their eyes met for a moment, and there was a silent, mutual understanding. For the first time in a long time, Robert didn't feel completely alone. He had someone who knew his pain, who understood his wounds, and that understanding, as painful as the revealed truth was, brought a strange comfort. Are you enjoying this story? Tell me what you think of it, and how you think it will end. The days following Helen's revelation transformed Robert in ways he could barely comprehend. The truth was both liberating and imprisoning. It freed him from the guilt he had carried like a dead weight on his back, but it trapped him in a dull rage against Irene and against a system that allowed mothers to destroy their daughters' happiness in the name of empty social expectations. Robert continued to wake up at 5 in the morning, maintaining his rigid routine, but something had changed in his eyes. Isabella noticed, with that childlike sensitivity that picks up on nuances invisible to adults. One night as he was making dinner, the girl asked if her dad was mad. Robert stopped stirring the beans on the stove and knelt beside his daughter, holding her small hands. "I'm not mad, sweetie. I'm just thinking. Sometimes grown-ups have to think a lot about complicated things." Isabella tilted her head, studying her father's face seriously. "Is it about Mommy?" Robert's heart skipped a beat. He never underestimated his daughter's intelligence, but her perceptiveness still surprised him. "Yes, it's about Mommy, but you don't have to worry. Daddy will take care of everything." The girl nodded and went back to playing with her colored pencils, but Robert stayed there kneeling for a few more seconds, watching this child who carried wounds she hadn't caused, paying the price for decisions made by selfish adults. Helen, for her part, felt simultaneously relieved and apprehensive after revealing the secret. In the days that followed, she and Robert began to talk more. Small backyard chats that stretched on, coffees shared on the porch, glances that communicated more than words. One afternoon, Helen baked cornbread, an old recipe she had learned from her mother. She took it over to Robert's house and found him in the yard, trying to fix an old bicycle he had bought at a thrift store to give Isabella for Christmas. He was sweaty and frustrated because the chain wouldn't fit right. "Can I help?" Robert looked up, accepted the plate with the cornbread, and smiled tiredly. "Honestly, Helen, I don't know the first thing about bikes. I thought it would be easy to fix, but this chain seems to have a mind of its own." Helen laughed, a light sound that surprised them both. She rarely laughed. She placed the cornbread on the plastic yard table and knelt beside Robert, examining the bicycle carefully. "My dad had a workshop. I picked up a few things watching him. Let me try." Together they worked on the bike as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard. Helen adjusted the chain with skilled hands, explaining each step, and Robert watched, fascinated not just by the repair, but by the woman beside him. There was a gentleness mixed with competence in her that intrigued him. Isabella arrived home from school just then, running through the gate with her backpack on. When she saw Helen and her dad together, working on the bike, her eyes lit up. "Aunt Helen, what are you guys doing?" Helen smiled at the girl, feeling a wave of genuine affection. "I'm helping your dad fix a surprise, but it's a secret, okay?" Isabella put a finger to her lips in a sign of silence and ran inside, leaving the two adults alone again. Robert looked at Helen with gratitude. "Thank you. For everything. For the truth. For the help. For being here." Helen felt her cheeks grow warm. It had been so long since someone had thanked her for simply existing, for offering her presence. "I should be thanking you, Robert. You have no idea. I spent my whole life. Being invisible, living to meet others' expectations. Being here, helping you two, makes me feel truly useful for the first time." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Robert realized they were both refugees from silent battles, survivors of family manipulations that stole their right to live authentically. From that day on, Helen became a constant presence in Robert and Isabella's lives. She helped with the girls' homework, sitting patiently beside her as Isabella struggled with math problems or tried to memorize words for spelling tests. Helen had infinite patience, explaining things in different ways until the girl understood, celebrating every correct answer as if it were a major achievement. She would prepare elaborate dinners and leave them on his doorstep when she knew Robert would be home late from a job. They weren't just simple meals, but meals made with care. Fluffy rice, well-seasoned beans, stewed meat that melted in your mouth, fresh salads. Robert would always find notes with the containers, short messages that warmed his tired heart. "So you can eat well tonight. Made with love. Save some for lunch tomorrow." She would sit with them on the porch on cool December evenings to talk about trivial things that seemed extraordinary simply because they were shared. They talked about the restoration projects Robert was working on, the books Helen was reading, Isabella's antics at school. Unhurried, unpretentious conversations that built intimacy brick by brick, like the walls Robert raised at his job. Isabella grew attached to Helen naturally and completely. She called her Aunt Helen with genuine affection, showed her the drawings she made at school with the pride of someone seeking approval. She asked for advice about childhood friendships, about silly fights at recess, about teachers she thought were unfair. Helen listened to everything, with total attention, validating the girl's feelings without downplaying her concerns, no matter how small they seemed to adult eyes. Helen, who had never had children and thought she had lost the chance to be a mother forever, discovered a capacity for love she never knew she possessed. Every one of Isabella's smiles healed something inside her, filled old voids with new tenderness. Each spontaneous hug from the girl was like a balm on wounds she didn't even know she carried. For the first time in her adult life, Helen felt needed not out of family obligation, but by mutual choice, by true affection. Robert watched this connection grow with mixed feelings, immense gratitude that Isabella had found a loving female figure in her life, but also a pang of guilt for not being able to fill all the spaces Maria's absence had left. He was a good father, he knew that, but he also recognized his limitations. There were aspects of raising a girl that he simply didn't fully understand, and seeing Helen fill those gaps so naturally was both comforting and humbling. Christmas was approaching quickly, bringing with it all the magic characteristic of Havenwood. The town transformed into an enchanting scene with its lights strung between the colonial houses, creating golden reflections on the centuries-old stone walls. Nativity scenes were set up on the main squares, clay figures arranged with reverent care. Choir rehearsals in the historic churches filled the nights with sacred music that echoed through the narrow streets, mingling with the sound of old bells. Isabella's school was preparing an ambitious Christmas pageant, and the girl came home every day singing songs she learned in rehearsals, practicing simple dance steps in front of the old bedroom mirror. Robert and Helen watched these impromptu performances with exaggerated pride, applauding every clumsy move as if it were the most brilliant performance ever seen. Isabella radiated happiness in these moments, and Robert mentally recorded every smile, every spontaneous laugh, saving these memories as an antidote to the difficult days. It was during one of these rehearsals that Robert's phone rang. It was an unknown number from Boston. He answered with a racing heart, a premonition creeping up his spine. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was female, hesitant, laden with restrained emotion. "Robert, it's Maria." The world stopped for a moment. Robert sat down heavily in a kitchen chair, gripping the phone tightly. 2 years of silence broken by that voice that still inhabited his nightmares and dreams. Maria. The name came out like a sigh. She took a deep breath before continuing. "I know I have no right to call. I know I was a coward, that I abandoned you both. But I need to talk to you, I need to explain." Robert closed his eyes, remembering Helen's words: pressure, blackmail, fear. The anger he felt toward Irene didn't fully extend to Maria, but the pain was still raw. "You don't have to explain, I know. What happened? I know about your mother, I know you were forced." A long silence on the other end. When Maria spoke again, her voice was choked with tears. "How do you know?" "Someone heard. Someone told me the truth." Maria began to cry, muffled sobs that traveled through the phone line, heavy with guilt and relief. "I wanted to be strong, Robert. I wanted to stand up to her, to fight for us, but I was weak. My mother has always been like that, controlling everything, deciding everything. When she threatened to disown me, to cut me off, I panicked. I thought it would be temporary, that I could convince her over time, but the longer I stayed away, the harder it was to come back." Robert felt tears burning his own eyes. The anger dissolved into a painful understanding. They had both been victims of Irene, of a toxic family system where love was used as a weapon of control. "So now what? Why did you call now?" "Because time is passing and Isabella is growing up without me. Because I realized my mother is wrong and I need to get my life back, my choices. Because I want to see my daughter, Robert. I want a chance to explain, to ask for forgiveness, to maybe rebuild something." Robert stood up, walked to the window, and watched Isabella playing in the yard with Helen. The girl was laughing, a pure sound he worked every day to preserve. "She asks about you. Every Christmas, every birthday, every time she sees a mother with a child on the street, She needs you, Maria. But I also can't let you walk in and out of her life like she's a toy you use and then forget. I don't want that. I want to come back for real. I want to win my family back if you'll let me. I cut ties with my mother. She hasn't spoken to me since I told her I was coming back to Havenwood. I chose you this time, Robert. Too late, I know, but I chose you. Robert felt his chest tighten with a suffocating intensity. Part of him wanted to hang up, to protect Isabella from another disappointment. Another part, smaller but insistent, remembered that Maria was also a victim, that she deserved a chance to repair what had been broken. Let me think. This isn't just about me, it's about Isabella. I have to do what's best for her. I understand, but Robert, please don't shut me out completely. Let me try. Let me show you that I've changed, that I've learned. He promised to think about it and hung up with trembling hands. He stood in the kitchen for long minutes processing the conversation, the return of the past, the possibilities that were opening up like old wounds beginning to throb again. Helen noticed the change when she came over for dinner that night. Robert was distant, lost in consuming thoughts. Isabella was already asleep, and the two of them sat on the porch under the starry December sky. What happened? Robert told her about the call, about Maria wanting to come back, about the impossible choices he had to make. Helen listened in silence, holding a cup of tea that was growing cold in her hands. And you? What do you feel? Robert sighed, running his hands over his tired face. Confusion, anger, fear, hope, all at the same time. Part of me wants to protect Isabella from any more pain. Another part knows she needs her mother, that she deserves this chance. And you, Robert, do you still love Maria? The question hung in the cold night air. Robert took a long time to answer, searching for honesty within the emotional chaos. I did love her, deeply. But these 2 years have changed a lot. I don't know if what I feel now is love or just nostalgia for what we had. Helen nodded, hiding the pain those words caused her. In recent weeks, she had realized her feelings for Robert went beyond friendship or compassion. It was something deeper, more frightening, but she stayed silent because she knew this wasn't the time. Whatever you decide, Robert, do it with Isabella in mind. She's the one who matters most in all of this. He agreed, and they sat in contemplative silence until the night chill forced them inside. But before they parted, Robert held Helen's hand briefly. Thank you for being here, for listening to me, for taking care of us. Helen squeezed his hand back, treasuring the touch. Always. Robert spent a sleepless night, tossing and turning in his narrow bed, torn between what his wounded heart screamed and what his conscience whispered. He got up several times, went to Isabella's room to watch his daughter sleep with the peaceful expression of someone who doesn't yet carry the weight of adult decisions. Every time he looked at that childish face, Robert felt the weight of responsibility crush his chest. He was all Isabella had, the only constant in a life marked by absence. When the sun rose over Havenwood, painting the colonial walls in golden hues, Robert had made his decision. He picked up the phone with trembling hands and called Maria. She answered on the second ring, her anxious voice revealing she hadn't slept either. Maria, I've thought a lot about what we talked about you wanting to see Isabella. There was a tense silence on the other end. Robert continued, choosing each word carefully. I'll let you see her, but on my terms. First, you're not going to show up promising things you can't deliver. Second, if you decide to come back into her life, it has to be for good. No showing up when you feel like it and disappearing when you get tired. And third, this will be on her time, not yours. If she doesn't want to see you, you will respect that. Maria sobbed on the other end of the line, a mix of relief and gratitude. I accept all your conditions. I swear on everything, Robert. I've changed. I completely cut ties with my mother. I quit the job she arranged. I moved back to Havenwood. I'm living in a small apartment near the bus station. I want to rebuild my life here, close to you both. Robert felt something clench in his chest. Maria was back in town. The reality of it was both terrifying and strange. For 2 years he had imagined this moment, but now that it was, here he felt unprepared. Okay, here's what we'll do. On Saturday, Isabella has her school's Christmas pageant. Come watch. Stay in the back. Don't approach her beforehand. Let her see you, process it, and decide if she wants to talk to you. After the show, if she wants to, you can talk." Maria agreed through her tears. They arranged the practical details, the time, the exact spot where she should stand. When he hung up, Robert sat heavily at the kitchen table, wondering if he had made the right choice. Helen showed up shortly after, bringing fresh bread from the bakery. She found Robert with a tormented expression, staring blankly at the cup of cold coffee in front of him. She placed the bread on the table and sat beside him, waiting. "I'm letting Maria come, on Saturday, to the school pageant." Helen felt her stomach churn, but she kept her expression neutral. She knew this moment would come, that Robert would have to make this choice, but that didn't make it any less painful. "You did what you thought was right for Isabella. That's what matters." Robert looked at Helen, seeing the restrained pain in her eyes even as she offered unconditional support. He took her hand across the table. "Helen, I need you to know something. These last few months, having you around has changed our lives. It's changed my life. You brought light into a house that had been dark for a long time. And whatever happens with Maria, it doesn't change how much I value you, how much you mean to me, and to Isabella." The words hung in the air, heavy with meanings neither of them was ready to fully name. Helen squeezed Robert's hand back, feeling tears welling up. "I value you both too, more than I can say." The week leading up to Saturday was tense and strange. Robert didn't tell Isabella about Maria's presence at the pageant, not wanting to create unnecessary expectations or anxiety. The girl sensed something was different, that the adults around her were carrying heavy secrets, but she focused her energy on the intensifying school rehearsals. Helen remained present, but Robert noticed a new melancholy in her eyes. She still helped with Isabella's homework, still prepared meals, still sat with them on the porch. But there was a subtle distance that hadn't been there before. Robert wanted to reassure her, but the right words seemed to escape him. On Thursday, while Isabella was asleep, they sat together on the porch under an exceptionally clear, starry sky. The silence between them was thick, full of unsaid things. "Are you scared about Saturday?" Helen's question was soft, but Robert heard all the layers of concern in it. "Terrified. I don't know how Isabella will react. I don't know if Maria will keep her promises. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. And there's one more thing that terrifies me." Helen turned to him, waiting. "I'm afraid that if Maria really has changed, if she really wants to rebuild our family, I'll have to choose between doing what's best for Isabella and doing what my heart really wants now." Helen understood immediately. She knew Robert was talking about her, about the feelings that were growing between them, silent but undeniable. She also knew he was right about the complexity of the situation. "Robert, I lived my whole life being controlled by other people, making choices based on what they expected of me, not what I wanted. I won't put you through that. Whatever you decide, it has to be yours, free of guilt, free of pressure." He looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and anguish. "What if I choose wrong? What if I hurt you in the process?" Helen smiled sadly. "Loving always comes with the risk of pain, but not loving, living in fear of feeling. That's a guarantee of eternal sadness. I learned that too late in life, but I learned it. So don't worry about me. Worry about Isabella, about what will bring peace to her heart." Saturday dawned with a blue sky and crisp air, perfect for the Christmas event. The school had set up a small stage in the outdoor courtyard, decorated with colorful lights and paper stars made by the children themselves. Plastic chairs were arranged in rows for parents and family, and a handmade nativity scene held a place of honor beside the stage. Robert arrived early with Isabella, who was radiant in her white angel dress, cardboard wings attached to her back with elastic. Helen accompanied them, helping to adjust the halo that kept slipping off Isabella's head. The other children ran around the courtyard in various states of nervousness and excitement. Parents snapped photos with their phones, and teachers tried to organize the chaos with dwindling patience. Robert scanned the crowd for Maria, but didn't see her at first. He sat in the third row with Helen by his side. his heart pounding erratically. Isabella was led backstage with the other children, and the buzz of the audience began to quiet down as the start time approached. It was then that he saw her. Maria was at the back of the courtyard, leaning against the school wall, practically hidden behind a group of taller parents. She wore simple clothes, her hair tied back in a ponytail, and even, from a distance, Robert could see she had lost weight. Her eyes were fixed on the stage with a painful intensity, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Helen followed Robert's gaze and saw her too. She felt a pang of something she didn't want to name jealousy, but it hurt just the same. Maria was beautiful, even marked by visible suffering. She was Isabella's mother. She was Robert's past, returning with full force. The pageant began with the younger children's choir singing traditional Christmas carols. Isabella appeared in the second act, playing an angel announcing good news. Her high, clear voice stood out in the choir, and Robert felt pride swell in his chest. He recorded everything with his old phone, his hands shaking slightly. In the middle of the performance, Isabella scanned the audience for her father. She found Robert easily, smiled broadly, and gave a discreet wave. Then her gaze continued to move and stopped abruptly. She saw Maria. Robert noticed the exact moment Isabella recognized her mother. The girl's body went rigid, the smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure shock. She stood frozen on the stage for seconds that felt like an eternity, while the other children continued to sing around her. A teacher whispered something to her, and Isabella began to sing again mechanically, but her eyes remained fixed on Maria. Maria, for her part, couldn't stop crying silently. Tears streamed down her face uncontrollably as she watched the daughter she had left behind. She saw how much Isabella had grown, how different she was, more mature, more serious. Every second was both a precious gift and a painful punishment. When the performance ended, the children rushed off the stage to their parents. Isabella ran straight to Robert, who scooped her up, in a tight hug, kissing her face several times. Helen straightened her crooked wings, praising her performance with genuine enthusiasm. But Isabella was distracted, looking over her father's shoulder to where Maria remained motionless. "Dad, Mommy's over there." Isabella's voice was small, confused, laden with emotions she had no words for. Robert carefully set his daughter down, kneeling to be at her eye level. "I know, sweetie. She came to see you. She wants to talk to you. But only if you want to. It's your decision." Isabella looked at Helen, searching for some kind of permission or guidance. Helen smiled encouragingly, hiding her own pain. "It's okay, Izzy. You can go talk to her." The girl nodded slowly and began to walk toward Maria. Robert and Helen stayed behind, watching. Each of Isabella's steps seemed to carry the weight of the world. When she finally got close to her mother, she stopped about 3 feet away, studying the face she recognized from photos, but which had become strange with time. Maria knelt, bringing herself to her daughter's level, respecting the space Isabella maintained. "Hi, sweetie. You're so big, so beautiful." Maria's voice trembled. Isabella didn't answer right away, just watched with the unsettling seriousness that children develop when they have to deal with adult situations. "Why did you leave?" The direct question hit Maria like a punch. She took a deep breath, searching for words that were both true and understandable for a 7-year-old. "Because I was weak. Because I let other people decide my life for me. Because I made a terrible mistake, and I've spent 2 years trying to find the courage to come back and ask for your forgiveness." "You didn't love me?" The words were almost inaudible, but Maria heard them clearly. She felt her heart break into pieces. "I have always loved you, every single day, every second. I left in spite of loving you, not because I didn't. And it was the worst thing I have ever done." Isabella processed this in silence. Then, with the brutal honesty of children, she asked, "Are you going to leave again?" Maria shook her head vehemently. "No, never again. I learned that nothing is worth it if it means being away from you. I came back to stay if you'll let me be a part of your life again." Isabella was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, she took a step forward, then another. Maria remained still, letting her daughter set the pace. When Isabella finally reached her, she hugged her mother timidly, her body still stiff. Maria wrapped her arms around her carefully, as if holding something extremely fragile that could break at any moment. She cried without a sound, her face buried in her daughter's hair, which smelled of children's shampoo and innocence. Robert watched it all with conflicting emotions tearing at his chest. Relief that Isabella was getting the chance she deserved. Pain because this meant changes he couldn't predict. Helen, beside him, hugged her own arms tightly, fighting the urge to run away. The reunion was brief. After a few minutes, Isabella pulled away, looked toward her father, and Maria understood the signal. She promised to call. They arranged another meeting for the following week, and she left with slow steps, looking back several times. Robert picked Isabella up again. The girl was emotionally exhausted. She rested her head on her father's shoulder and was quiet. The weeks following the reunion were a period of delicate adjustments and complex emotions for everyone involved. Maria kept her promise, showing up for carefully. Planned meetings with Isabella, always in safe public places. They would go to the town green to feed the pigeons, get ice cream at the shop on Main Street, and walk along the winding roads, talking about the small things that rebuild burned bridges. Robert observed these meetings from a distance, present but not intrusive, allowing mother and daughter to reconstruct their bond at their own pace. He saw Isabella gradually relax in Maria's presence, saw the smile return to the girl's face more fully, but he also noticed the confusion she carried about how to organize her affections. 1DC. Night after a particularly long outing at the park, Isabella asked Robert if Mommy was going to live with them again. The question came as he was tucking her into bed, and it caught Robert completely off guard. "What would you like, sweetie? Do you want Mommy to live with us?" Isabella was silent for a long moment, her brow furrowed in serious concentration. "I want Mommy to be in my life, but I want Aunt Helen to stay here too, and I don't know if I can have both." The wisdom of the 7-year-old left Robert speechless. Isabella had precisely identified the conflict he himself couldn't resolve. He kissed his daughter's forehead, murmured that everything would be okay, but when he left the room, he carried an even heavier weight on his chest. Helen sensed the growing distance. Robert was more pensive, more absent, trapped in dilemmas she understood but couldn't comment on without seeming selfish. She began to emotionally prepare herself for the possibility that Robert and Maria would rebuild their family, and that she would have to go back to being just the quiet neighbor from before. It was Mrs. Davis, the woman who looked after Isabella, who finally forced a conversation they were all avoiding. She invited Robert for coffee at her house on a Thursday afternoon, and when he arrived, he found not only Mrs. Davis, but also Helen, and, to his surprise, Maria. The three women were sitting in the modest living room, their expressions serious. Robert felt as if he were walking into a well-intentioned ambush. "Sit down, Robert. We need to talk." Mrs. Davis pointed to a chair and poured strong coffee into a small cup. Robert sat down uncomfortably, looking between the three women who represented different aspects of his complicated life. "I see you all suffering because nobody has the guts to speak the truth, so I'll start." Mrs. Davis looked at Maria with a firm expression. "You messed up. You messed up badly when you abandoned this family. It doesn't matter that your mother pressured you. You were an adult and you made a cowardly choice. But I also see that you're trying to fix it, that you really came back. That counts for something." Maria nodded, accepting the harsh words without argument. Mrs. Davis then turned to Helen. "And you, my dear, are suffering in silence because you think you don't have the right to feel what you feel. But love doesn't follow a timeline or logic. You love Robert and Isabella, and that's real, no matter when it started." Helen blushed deeply, staring at her hands in her lap. Robert's heart raced at the indirect but powerful confession. "And you, Robert, are trying to make everyone happy, and you're destroying yourself in the process. So I'm going to say something that sounds cruel but is necessary. You can't rebuild the past. What you had with Maria died when she left. Can something new grow in its place? Maybe. But it won't be the same as it was." Robert opened his mouth to protest, but Mrs. Davis held up a hand, cutting him off. "Let me finish. Isabella needs her mother, that's true, but she also needs a father who is genuinely happy, not just functional. Children can feel when adults are sacrificing their happiness for them, and it becomes a burden they carry for the rest of their lives. A heavy silence fell over the room. Then Maria spoke, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "Robert, I came here today because Mrs. Davis sought me out and said I needed to be honest about my feelings. So I will be. I loved you deeply. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and leaving you and Isabella destroyed me in ways I'm still processing. When I came back, part of me hoped we could rebuild what we had. But these last few days, watching you and Helen together, seeing how you look at each other, how she cares for Isabella, how you light up when she arrives, I realized something important." She took a deep breath, wiping away her tears. "You've already moved on. Your heart has already chosen someone else. And that's okay, more than okay, it's fair. I have no right to come back and demand that you freeze your life in the same sadness where I left it. What I want, what I'm asking for, is permission to be Isabella's mother without it meaning we have to rebuild our marriage. We can be co-parents without being a couple, for our daughter's sake." Robert was stunned by her words. Helen stared intently at her coffee cup, her hands trembling slightly. Mrs. Davis watched it all with the satisfied expression of someone who had just conducted a necessary emotional surgery. "Maria, I don't know if I've moved on. I know I'm confused, scared, lost between the past and the future." Helen finally looked up, meeting Robert's eyes with a courage that had taken her years to build. "Robert, you don't owe me anything. I came into your life when you were broken. I helped because I wanted to, not because I expected anything in return. If you decide to try again with Maria, if that's what will bring peace to you and Isabella, I'll still be your friend, your neighbor. I'll still love that little girl. But I also need you to know something." She paused, took a deep breath, and said the words she never imagined she'd have the courage to speak. "I fell in love with you. Completely. In the most inconvenient and unexpected way possible. I fell in love with the man you are, the dedicated father, the kind person who still believes in goodness after so much suffering. I'm not asking you to choose me. I just needed you to know the truth, because I've spent too much of my life hiding my feelings, and I'm not doing it anymore." Robert felt something break inside him, like a dam finally giving way to the pressure of accumulated water. He stood up, walked over to Helen, and knelt beside her chair. "Helen, when Maria left, I thought I'd never be able to trust anyone again. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life just surviving, just going through the motions. Then you showed up with lemonade and the truth I needed to hear. You brought light into our darkness without asking for anything in return. You taught me that love can be gentle, built slowly based on respect and daily choices. I fell in love with you too. I'm scared of it, scared of making the wrong choice, scared of hurting people. But the truth is, my heart has already chosen, just like Maria said." He took Helen's hands in his, looking into her eyes with intensity. "I choose you. I choose the future we can build together. I choose the happiness you brought into my life and Isabella's life." Helen cried openly, and Robert pulled her into a tight embrace. Maria watched the scene with her own tears, but also with something resembling relief. Mrs. Davis nodded in satisfaction, pouring more coffee as if she had just mediated a discussion about the weather. "Now that you're done with this nonsense of pretending you don't feel what you feel, you can start to sort things out for real. Isabella needs all of you, each in a different role. Maria, you're the mother. Helen, you're becoming a stepmother, whether you like the term or not. Robert, you're still the father, and I'm still the old lady who looks after this girl while you all work and sort out your messes." They laughed through their tears, a release of weeks of pent-up tension. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking about practical logistics, how to organize Maria's visits, how to officially introduce Helen as Robert's partner, how to explain everything to Isabella in a way she would understand that gaining more love never means losing the love that was already there. Christmas arrived in full force in Havenwood. The town glittered with decorations, and the main community Christmas event was held on the town green. A large stage was set up, stalls sold local food, a choir prepared to sing, and children ran around excitedly, waiting for Santa Claus to arrive. Robert, Helen, Isabella, and Maria went together, a family rebuilt in a non-traditional but authentic form. Isabella wore a new dress that Helen had bought her and held Robert's and Maria's hands as they walked, with Helen close behind, carrying the girl's backpack full of snacks. They found Mrs. Davis already settled in a chair near the stage, saving seats for them all. The old woman watched the group approach and smiled with maternal satisfaction. The event began with a local marching band, followed by folk dances and Christmas carols sung by a powerful choir. Isabella watched, everything with shining eyes, soaking in the magic of the celebration. Robert and Helen sat side by side, their hands discreetly intertwined. Maria was on Isabella's other side, and there was a peace on her face, a genuine acceptance of her new role. In the middle of the celebration, Isabella turned to Robert and whispered, "Dad, I have a really big family now, don't I?" Robert smiled, his heart bursting with love. "You sure do, sweetie, and every single person here loves you very much." Isabella thought about it, then nodded in satisfaction and went back to watching the show. In that simple moment, Robert realized that happiness didn't come from perfect, socially approved arrangements. It came from honesty, from people choosing to stay even when it would be easier to leave, from love expressed in small but consistent daily actions. The fence that Robert had fixed months ago at the beginning of this journey now symbolized not separation, but the protection of a rebuilt home. The house that had been marked by absence had become a space of courageous truths and multiple affections. Helen had not replaced Maria, just as Maria had not disappeared from Isabella's life. They both occupied different but equally important spaces in that little girl's heart. As the bells of the historic churches began to ring, announcing the arrival of Christmas midnight, Robert looked around at the people he loved. Maria was chatting with Mrs. Davis about New Year's plans. Helen was adjusting Isabella's coat, which had slipped off her shoulder. Isabella was laughing at something a little friend had said. He had started that year broken, merely surviving. He was ending it transformed, not completely healed because some wounds never fully scar over, but capable of being happy again, capable of loving again, capable of believing in second chances, third chances, in as many chances as it took to build something real. Christmas in Havenwood shone with its old lights and preserved traditions, but inside Robert's heart, there was a new light, a renewed hope. He held Helen's hand tighter, pulled Isabella in for a hug, and nodded to Maria with genuine gratitude. They weren't a perfect family. They were a real family, built through pain, truth, and brave choices. And that was more than enough. Fake snow fell over the square, simulating an impossible winter in the New England climate. Children ran around laughing, trying to catch the styrofoam flakes, and the choir sang of peace on earth and goodwill toward men. Robert closed his eyes for a moment, engraving the feeling, that instant of complete contentment. When he opened them again, Helen was looking at him with a soft smile. He leaned in and kissed her forehead gently, a silent promise of shared futures. Isabella, watching, smiled knowingly and went back to playing with her friends. The churches continued to ring their bells. The choir sang of hope and renewal. And in that small historic Vermont town, a rebuilt family celebrated not just Christmas, but the courage to start over, even when all seemed lost. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert, Helen, Maria, and Isabella has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of family reconstruction, forgiveness, and love in its most diverse forms, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what resonated with you the most. Do you believe in second chances? Have you gone through moments of starting over in your own life? Share your stories with us. Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, show that family can be built in unexpected ways, and that true love doesn't always follow a traditional script. We'll see you in the next episode.